Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn McCrea. I am the Director of Financial Wellness here at the Virginia Credit Union Financial Success Center at VCU. So pleased to see you all joining us today for today's conversation about public service loan forgiveness. Got a couple housekeeping items for you. First and foremost, yes, this presentation is being recorded. We always get that question right off the bat. It is being recorded, so you will be able to refer back to this after today's session. You will see that we have the chat function enabled so that you can submit any questions that you might have, and we will be pausing throughout today's presentation to make sure that we're answering all of your questions. I'm trying to leave time for questions at the end of the presentation as well. If you have really specific questions about your particular circumstances regarding public service loan forgiveness, you will get my contact information, my office's contact information at the end of the presentation as well, so that we can help you to kind of navigate these waters if there's something really particular that you would like to make sure that you are doing correctly to ensure that you receive the public service loan forgiveness that you think you qualify for. So again, use that chat function to send in any questions. I would like to thank VCU Human Resources for hosting this presentation again today. Such valuable information to make sure that all VCU employees know what their options are when it comes to repaying their student loans. And again, we appreciate you being here. So Cindy Fairs is joining us from Human Resources. She will be monitoring the chat to help us answer questions. And again, we'll be periodically stopping throughout today's presentation to make sure we're answering those. And we will have time at the end to answer questions as well. So the way that this presentation is going to be structured, we're going to talk a little bit about public service loan forgiveness from big picture, high level. Then we're going to go into the details of what exactly qualifies an individual to receive public service loan forgiveness. And then we're going to talk a little bit about following that trajectory over the 10 years, as well as applying for forgiveness if you have reached that 10-year 120 payment qualifying place. We're also going to be talking a little bit about some of those emergency relief options that are still in place right now for all of us who might have student loans. Make sure that you're aware of what those are and make sure that you're prepared to enter into repayment when that happens, when those relief measures are removed. So again, if you've got questions, send them into the chat, and let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, what is public service loan forgiveness? So public service loan forgiveness is the remaining balance, forgiving the remaining balance of your direct loans. So if you have made 120 qualifying monthly payments under a qualifying repayment plan, and you have been working full-time, and we'll talk about what that means, for a qualifying employer, then you can apply for public service loan forgiveness and have that remaining balance removed and forgiven. So today's word of the day, and I'm going to be saying this one a lot, most important word is qualifying. This refers to your repayment plan. This refers to the payments that you make on a monthly basis, and this refers to your employer. Both your employer has to qualify and the type of employment that you hold with that employer has to qualify to make sure that you are meeting the requirements for the public service loan forgiveness program. This is a federally run program, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the additional resources that you can use to make sure that you're navigating the system in the most appropriate and effective way to achieve that loan forgiveness at the end of your 120 payments. So first and foremost, what qualifies, right? That's the word of the day. And the thing that qualifies first is VCU employment. To qualify for public service loan forgiveness, you need to be employed by a U.S., federal, state, or tribal government agency, or a not-for-profit, which means 501c3 organization in the United States. You need to work full-time for that agency or organization, and the way that that is defined through Fed loan servicing is 30 hours or whatever that employer considers to be full-time. So 30 hours a week or whatever your employer considers to be full-time, because that can change a little bit. Some employers consider 35 hours a week to be full-time. So if your employer considers it, or it's 30 hours, those would qualify you for your employment type. So you need to work full-time for them. You need to have direct loans. So there are other types of federal student loans that are a little bit older than the direct loan program. Those don't qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. It's the direct loans specifically. We'll talk a little bit more about what those are here in a few minutes. You can consolidate any loans that you do have, any federal loans that you have, into a direct loan. But again, it has to be listed as direct loan for it to qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program. And then we have to make sure that you are repaying your loans under an income-driven repayment plan. So there are several different types of repayment plans. We'll talk a little bit about what each of those look like, but they're based on your income, usually 10% to 15% of what your income is, and that allows you to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And again, you have to make those 120 qualifying payments. So these are our types of qualifying repayment plans. Some of you might be familiar with some of the verbiage that you're seeing on this slide here, and some of this might be very, very new to you, depending on where in the repayment stage you are. I think what's most important is to look at the bottom of the screen here and identify the types of repayment plans that do not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. We want to make sure that you're in an income-driven repayment plan. So that means that a standard repayment plan, a graduated repayment plan, extended, or the alternative repayment plans, they don't qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. You do need to be in one of the income-driven repayment plans. So that's pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn, income-based, income contingent, and the standard repayment plan, there's a little bit of a caveat with that. If you have a standard repayment plan, it technically kind of qualifies, but because it takes 10 years for a standard repayment plan to pay down your loans, and it takes 10 years for you to receive the loan forgiveness from public service loan forgiveness, basically you won't have a balance to forgive. So while it qualifies, you wouldn't have a balance to forgive. So we don't recommend using the standard repayment plan when you are trying to pursue public service loan forgiveness. So I think that repayment plans can be a little bit confusing. We'll talk a little bit about how you can actually access those repayment plans here in a moment. But Cindy, I'm going to stop here and see if we've got any questions off of the bat about just general qualifications or those repayment plans that I mentioned that qualify you for public service loan forgiveness.
Okay, so we did get a couple of questions. Of course, the first one was, will a transcript be provided? And you already said that you are recording this. The next one was, can Pslf be used retroactively? If you have 4 years of qualified payments but never signed up, do those count towards 10?
Great question. The answer is, it depends. If you have been in that qualifying repayment plan and you've been working for a qualifying employer and your loans qualify, then yes, it can apply retroactively. We'll talk a little bit about what the paperwork looks like to actually make sure that you are pursuing public service loan forgiveness correctly, and making sure that you're setting yourselves up to be approved for that final forgiveness payment. But yes, it can be applied retroactively. You just have to make sure that you're meeting all of those particular qualifications. Because if you are in the wrong repayment plan, but you're working for a qualifying employer, that's not going to qualify you. So it won't be able to be applied retroactively at that point. But yes, if you're in year 6 and you haven't submitted your paperwork, but you know you've been in a qualifying repayment plan, you know you have qualifying loans, you know you've been working for a qualifying employer, you can have your employment certified to have those payments all count towards public service loan forgiveness. It's a really good question.
The next question is, will TEPSLF be discussed?
Yes, yeah. So temporary extended public service loan forgiveness will be discussed. It might actually, I think it's my next slide. So yeah, you guys are on the ball today for sure.
The next question is, I had read that if you work for 2 qualifying employers part-time and the total hours per week is over 30 hours, you still qualify. Can you confirm that, please?
So I am not familiar with 2 part-times equaling a full-time. If you use the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Help Tool, which you can just Google that and it'll get you right where you need to be. That's where you submit all of your forms to basically determine if your employer, if your employment qualifies. To my knowledge, it is full-time employment at one employer, but that might be something new that I'm not familiar with. But that is not something that is readily posted on the Fed Loan Servicing or Studentaid websites with information about this program.
The next question is, what about those on 20-year standard repayment plans?
Yeah, so if you're on a 20-year standard repayment plan, as long as it's a direct loan, again, and you've got that qualifying employment and you've been working on a qualifying repayment plan, so 20-year standard should qualify you, then yes, you should be able to pursue public service loan forgiveness.
How do I find out how many qualifying payments are on the account?
Oh, very good question. And we will get to that here in just a little bit.
How does the current federal student loan forbearance fit into the repayment qualification? Would I be penalized if I haven't been paying during the forbearance?
Yes, so the forbearance relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and the emergency relief measures that are currently in place. And so we will be getting to all of that as we get to the end of the presentation. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what exactly public service loan forgiveness entails. And then we will talk a little bit more about those emergency relief measures, including the forbearance, the suspended payments that are happening right now. Good questions, y'all.
The last one, it looks like somebody shared an article about part-time employment eligibility for PSLF.
Perfect.
So that's the end of the questions.
Okay, very good. So that's the great part about working, at VCU and with other academics is, right, we know how to do our research. So thank you for sharing that article there. And we'll take a look at that here in just a little bit. So good questions, everybody. We'll keep talking. We're going to talk a little bit about the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, and then we will continue moving on to the rest of what kind of qualifies for that public service loan forgiveness program. So we just talked about the qualifying repayment plans and that they are, for the most part, the income-driven, the income-based repayment plans. So again, that's Repay and the income-driven, income contingent. Those all qualify you for public service loan forgiveness. The way that temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness works is that if you think you meet all of the other requirements for the program, but you weren't in a qualifying repayment plan for a couple years, you can use the forms to certify your employment or to apply for forgiveness, and you can use temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. So basically our legislator said, we're not forgiving enough loans because there are a lot of requirements to this program and it can be really tricky to navigate. So they have temporarily expanded some of those restrictions, so that if you were in the standard repayment plan for consolidated loans, or you were on a graduated repayment plan, or whatever it was, you can actually apply under temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness to have those loans forgiven or to have those payments qualify towards your 120 monthly payments. So again, this program is temporary and it has limited funding. So it's going to be on a first come, first served basis. So if this is something that you think you might allow you to become more eligible for public service loan forgiveness, you're going to want to get into that public service loan forgiveness help tool today, as soon as possible, and go ahead and fill out that form. And they have streamlined the form. It's really easy to find, and it is the same form now for public service loan forgiveness and temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. But again, the main difference between the two is temporary expanded is you've met all of the other qualifications of the public service loan forgiveness program, except for you were in a different repayment plan. You didn't know that you needed to be in one of the income-driven repayment plans. So that's how that one differs. Want to make sure that for the folks who are asking about the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, that you have had your questions answered.
There are no more questions, so we're
Okay.
good.
Great. So yeah, so public service loan forgiveness, temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, basically the same program, just a little bit lightened up on the restrictions surrounding those repayment plans that you can use to qualify your monthly payments. So again, if this is what you're wanting to apply for, go ahead and do it now, because when the funding runs out, there's no guarantee that they're going to do something else like this moving forward. Okay. So your income-driven repayment plans and your public service loan forgiveness, for your public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment plans have to be recertified every single year. And you will get email reminders, you'll get notifications through studentaid.gov or through Fed Loan Servicing. And Fed Loan Servicing is who administers the public service loan forgiveness program on behalf of the federal government. So your employment, your income-driven repayment plan has to be recertified every single year. So basically, they take a look at what your income is. They take a look at how that might have changed, how your household might have changed, other student loans that you might be using, if you've re-entered into school or something along those lines. They will take all of that into account, and then they will issue you a new payment that's based on all of those updated income factors. So if you're in an income-driven repayment plan, your payment is likely not going to remain the same from year 1 to year 10 of your pursuit of public service loan forgiveness. What that typically means for individuals is you might start out at a very low payment. Some people even start out at owing $0. And it might go to a higher payment as you get to years 8, 9, and 10, as your income grows or as your household changes. If your taxes change, if you start filing your taxes jointly. The nice thing about this is that you can go to Fed Loan Servicing or studentaid.gov, and you can do your recertification right then and there. And they actually sync with the IRS to make sure that they're using all of your updated tax return information. So this is usually a very quick process for you to submit the form. And then you usually, in normal times, in the before times, you usually get an answer within 4 to 8 weeks. It's a little bit longer right now because of some of the emergency relief that is in place still. We'll talk about what that looks like here in a moment. But yes, you're going to need to make sure that for those income-driven repayment plans that you are staying on top of, making sure that you're submitting all of that on time with enough time for studentaid.gov or Fed Loan Servicing to review and give you that new amount due, and make sure that you're back in the right income-driven repayment plan that suits your household and income levels, so that you're not paying additional, going automatically into a standard repayment plan that has a higher monthly bill, for example, and then having less money that's available to be forgiven at the end of your 10 years, 120 monthly payments. So make sure you note down the studentaid.gov website there. That is going to be your friend throughout this entire process. They have tons and tons of information on all of this program. And while it is a complicated program, they try to make it as easy as possible to follow the instructions to be able to get the forms and the repayment plans that you need to be successful. Okay, so we talked a lot about monthly payments and what those monthly payments look like. Payments that qualify have to have been made after October 1st, 2007. Anything that was made prior to then is not going to count towards this particular program. Now, likely, because it's 2021, that's not the case for a lot of you on this call, but for some of you who might be in one of those 20 or 30-year repayment plans, you might have payments that you made prior to October 2007, and those are not going to count towards your total count for public service loan forgiveness. Those payments have to be made for the full amount due that was shown on your bill in that qualifying repayment plan, and they have to be on time. They can't be more than 15 days late, or it's not going to count towards public service loan forgiveness. So your loans have to be in good standing. If you are late with payments or you default on your payments, that's going to cause problems for how you qualify for this particular program. Payments that don't qualify, if your loans are in an in-school status, if they're in a grace period, and in the before times, if they're in a deferment or forbearance. That we're going to talk about what that means for the COVID-19 emergency relief, because that's a little bit different. But in general, outside of those COVID-19 emergency relief measures, deferment and forbearance payments made during those don't qualify. Another type of payment that doesn't qualify is if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to get this done in 5 years because I'm going to make 2 monthly payments every single month. I'm going to make a payment in full on the 1st and a payment in full on the 15th. That's not going to count. It is one payment per month, 120 payments. So 10 years, as long as you haven't gone into a grace period or deferment or forbearance or gone back to school, pausing your payments. So as long as that's happening, then those payments can qualify. You can, if you are going to school, say part-time, VCU has a lot of great benefits, including the tuition benefits here, where you can take a class or two while you are employed by VCU. The Fed loan servicing and student aid will automatically put you into an in-school status, and they will suspend your payments. However, you can request to remain in repayment if you would like to continue making those payments and having those payments count towards public service loan forgiveness, stopping the accrual, so that you're not making $0 payments while interest is accruing, that type of thing. You can absolutely do that. And it's just a form that they ask you to fill out. The caveat with that is that if you are in an in-school status and you fill out that form saying, I don't want to have that in-school status, I don't want to have my payments paused, I want to have them go and count towards public service loan forgiveness. If you fill out that form one time, that means you can never get the in-school deferment again. So it is a one and done type deal. But again, this is what is going to happen as far as what your monthly payments are going to look like to make sure that you're qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. So I'm going to pause here because I think a couple of questions have come in and see if there's any additional questions about the monthly payments, that payment cycle, and some of the things that kind of tie into making sure that those payments qualify.
So the first question is, does PSLF include parent plus loans?
Does not.
The next question is, will we be prompted to recertify, or do we need to remember to do it every year?
Yeah, so for the income-driven repayment plans, you will be prompted to recertify, usually 2 or 3 months prior to your recertification expiring. And that will go to your inbox in your studentaid.gov portal or into your Fed loan servicing portal, and sometimes both. So you will get an email notification saying, hey, there's a message about your account related to public service loan forgiveness. I think that the title of these emails usually says something along the lines of, it's time to recertify. And you need to make sure you go in and you do that right away. Because again, it does take them a little bit of time to actually make sure that they've got everything right and to issue you that new balance due based on your new income-driven repayment plan. And you want to make sure that that gets done prior to the income-driven repayment plan that you're on for that calendar cycle to be done. And this is completely based on when you start your income driven. So it could be that you run February to February or May to May. It's completely different for every individual. There's not one particular time of year that the recertification happens. It's based on your individual repayment status and when you entered into repayment, when you started that income driven repayment plan.
That is the end of the questions. Someone asked me to send them the recording, which I'm happy to do, but I don't have a full name. So if you want me to send you the recording after I get it back, in the chat, you can send it just directly to me, Cindy, and just send me your name and email address, and I'll add you to the list. All right.
Awesome. Yes.
Oh, there's one more question. Does
great.
PSLF payments have to be consecutive?
Good question. They do not have to be consecutive. You can start payments and then go to school and enter into an in-school status and then take it up again later. So yes, they can be paused. There are certain deferments and forbearance, if you've experienced an economic hardship, for example. Now, again, this is outside of the COVID-19 emergency relief measures, but if you lost a job, for example, or were laid off and you did your emergency forbearance to say, I'm not going to do payments right now, Because, if you're not working for a qualifying employer, then any payments that you make won't qualify towards public service loan forgiveness, right? So you want to make sure that all of the payments that you do make count towards that 120 count. So you can always enter into one of those emergency forbearances for economic hardship or because you're out of work or whatever that is. And then once you are back in work, you can start those payments again. Good question.
And I think that's the end of the questions for now.
Great. If things keep popping in, make sure to send them over to Cindy, but these are really good questions, y'all. Thank you so much for being engaged today. So the big recommendation that I have for everybody who is thinking about or is currently pursuing public service loan forgiveness is to make sure that you are doing your employment certification annually. So this is every 12 months, you have a reminder on your calendar that you say, okay, I've been working for VCU for another 12 months. I'm going to send in my employment certification. And so this is a form that you can access through the Pslf help tool. Again, if you type that into your Google bar, it's going to take you right there. And it will take you to the Fed Loan Servicing or the studentaid.gov website so that you can use the forms that they have there available for you. But employment certification looks like a form that basically says, hey, this is my employer. This is who I've been working for. Your employer signs off on it. So human resources can sign off on it. In some cases, your supervisor or your department chair or the dean of your school can sign off on it. Basically, someone saying, yes, I verify that this person has been working for this qualifying employer for the last 12 months. And we had a question earlier about, hey, how can you track how many payments you've made? This is the way to track how many qualifying payments you have made, because you will send in your employment certification and you will get a letter back. They will go in and they will verify that, yes, you have worked there. Yes, you have made the qualifying payments under that repayment plan, under that income-driven repayment plan. And they will send you back a letter with an updated count, and it will have every direct loan that you have listed in your name. And it will say, great, you have made 12 qualifying payments. And then if you do it again the second year, it'll say, great, you've made 24 qualifying payments and you have 96 remaining. So that is the best way to make sure that you are pursuing public service loan forgiveness correctly. There was a lot of flack around this program a couple years ago, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, about how few people were actually getting their loans discharged through this program. They had finally reached that 10-year milestone, right? This program started in 2007. So 2017, we had people finally start applying for their forgiveness, and very, very few ended up getting it approved. And that was more because of user error, although I will grant you that the program is probably overly complicated. What government programs aren't overly complicated, I suppose, is the next question. But a lot of it was user error, where they weren't in the right repayment plan, or they didn't have direct loans. They had a different type of loan, like a Perkins loan, for example, that doesn't qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program, or they weren't working full time, or they, were working for a for-profit educational institution, which is not going to qualify. It has to be not-for-profit, right? Those types of things. But if you're doing your employment certification every year, then you have a written record saying, yep, we all agree that you have made X number of qualifying payments. And so your remaining payments are this, and your estimated time that you will be able to apply for forgiveness is this. So definitely recommend that you do this at least every year. And also if you change employers. So if you work at VCU now, and you were to go and start at another government agency, for example, or another nonprofit, I recommend going ahead and sending in your employment certification even at month 0 with that new employer, because they'll send you back a letter that at least confirms that your employer does qualify, right? They won't say that you've made any qualifying payments yet, but you will get a letter saying like, yep, your employer qualifies. And so you know that a year from then you can submit that form again and make sure that you've got those 12 payments kind of counted towards the 120, and you know what your new balance is. And again, The employment certification form, the PSLF help tool is where you can access that. It's an online portal that has all of the forms that you need. You can fill them all out electronically. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of the other requirements for those forms are as we continue to go through the program. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually applying for forgiveness. So we've kind of gotten to all of the portions of what you need to do to make sure that you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Next, we're going to talk about actually applying for that forgiveness, for that final discharge of your direct loans. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any other questions that I need to answer about just the qualification process and the payment process through that 10 years, 120 payments.
The only questions so far is, do they backdate if you start certification now?
Yeah. So you can, so say if anybody on the call has been working for VCU for 4 years and you've been in an income-driven repayment plan and you have direct loans, go ahead and get on the PSLF help tool today again and send in that employment certification. And we'll talk a little bit about what you need to have included with that. But basically, you fill out a little bit of information, and then again, your supervisor or human resources can sign it saying, yes, I agree that they have been working full-time for VCU, which is a qualifying employer for public service loan forgiveness. You can go ahead and get that submitted. So you put the dates on there. And you send that in and they will go, okay, great. Like, so you've been employed from whatever day it is. And they will go in and they will backdate any qualifying payments that you have made during that 4-year period of time. Again, this is where a lot of people were surprised when they went to go apply for forgiveness after they thought they had made 120 qualifying payments, that they weren't working for a qualifying employer. So that is why we recommend that you do this every year. You do this every time you change employers. This is the way to make sure that you are actually tracking and that you are on track for public service loan forgiveness. And then last recommendation regarding your employment certification is these are digital letters, right? They go into your inbox through Fed Loan Servicing or through studentaid.gov. And so you're going to want to save these somewhere. You're going to want to download them and save them in your Google Drive, or you're going to want to print them and have them in a folder in your safe at home, something so that you can, when you're applying for forgiveness at the end of those 120 payments, you have a paper trail saying, yes, I did it. We don't want to trust any external parties to tracking your own forgiveness journey. We want to make sure that you are on top of that.
So one more question. So when you send the employment certification and they approve it, they are also approving the type of loan and payment plan as well?
So yeah, so what they are doing is they are taking a look at your employment certification and you get a letter back that says, yep, we agree, you have made X number of qualifying payments. And so that's how you can check to make sure that that you are, dotting I's, crossing T's, that you're doing everything that public service loan forgiveness requires of you and expects of you to apply for forgiveness at the end of your 10 years, at the end of your 120 payments. This is where you get that check saying like, yes, you have made 12 qualifying payments or 24 qualifying payments and you have X number remaining. This is a different form from actually applying for your income-driven repayment. You have to do that annually, and they will send you reminders about that. Employment certification, this is at your own discretion to send in, but it is a really great way to track your progress through the program.
Last question, does the employer certification need to be wet signed or is digital okay?
Great question. We will talk about that here, but in a minute, but they don't accept like e-signatures. So it has to be signed with a pen, or I believe they say that you can, if you've got some kind of software on your computer or tablet, you can like sign it with a finger or with like a stylus, but it can't be one of the digitally signed and authenticated with a password. They don't accept that right now. Good question.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. So let's talk about actually applying for forgiveness. So when you make your 120th qualifying payment, you are going to then use the online tools, or you can do a PDF application through studentaid.gov to say, hey, I have done everything that we agreed upon that I would do, and I would like to have my remaining direct loan balance forgiven. And you will send that to Fed Loan Servicing on behalf of the Department of Education, and they will review it. And the key part is if you are close to this, if you're close to your 120th payment, you need to keep in mind that you will need to continue making payments until you get the letter back saying, yep, your final loan balance for any direct loans that are remaining on your account are going to be forgiven because you've met the requirements of this program. You've done the 120 payments. So you need to make sure that you are continuing to make those payments, which sounds a little bit silly, but again, they do take a little bit of time to actually review these, usually 4 to 8 weeks in the before times. Might be a little bit longer now because they're getting inundated with lots and lots of questions about student aid and repaying loans and all of that fun stuff as we navigate, the end of this COVID-19 pandemic. Any overpayments that you make, so they will say, yep, you qualified on this date and it was this balance, and so we're going to forgive that. So if you've made some payments and lowered that balance a little bit more, those payments will be refunded back to you. So any overpayments that you make while you're waiting for that approval letter to come in, those will get refunded back to you. And it's important to keep making those payments because, again, if you haven't been doing your employer certification and you don't have a paper trail, they could come back and say, no, you don't qualify, you haven't done something. And so you want to make sure that you're still making those payments because you want your loans to stay in good standing, right? You don't want to be considered in default or having suspended payments or anything like that. You want to make sure that everything is still in good standing so you can go in and do an appeal or whatever you might need to do to make sure that you secure that public service loan forgiveness. So that is what we recommend as far as applying for forgiveness. It's a lot easier when you have that paper trail in place and you have your employer certifications already on file, so that you have that list kind of, tracking down, hey, I've only got 6 more payments to make and then I'm good. That allows you to be a little bit more confident in this final application for forgiveness. So I'll pause there because I think maybe another question or two came through.
Yes, if I can find the unmute button. Somebody asked a question, but now she said it was answered, but let's ask it again. Will
Sure.
you be refunded for amounts you pay while awaiting approval?
Yes. Yeah. So again, if you are approved and you have continued making payments to make sure that your loans remain in good standing while you wait for that final decision, you will be refunded for any overpayments. So yes, yeah, very important to make sure that we're all doing exactly everything that we need to be doing to make sure that our financials are in good standing, right? We don't want any dings on our credit report of that you still have a bill due, right? And then you don't make that payment. We don't want to have that happen to you while you're awaiting that forgiveness decision. So very important to continue making those payments while you wait for that final decision. Good question.
2 more. The next one is VCU considered a governmental agency as we have state employee status for the purposes of filling out the employer certification form?
Yeah, so VCU is a qualifying employer. So we are, if you look at the employment certification box, we are the option that is at the top right. And again, if you have questions specifically about that, you can always ask your HR professional too. They will be able to answer that for you. But if I'm remembering correctly, it's the box on the top right is the correct one to use for your VCU employment if you're doing the employer certification form. Good question.
And then do I apply with studentaid.gov to consolidate my loans into a direct loan, or do I contact my current lenders?
Yeah, so you are going to want if you are going to be pursuing public service loan forgiveness and you have had your loans elsewhere, you are going to want them to go into consolidation with Fed Loan Servicing. That is who does the public service loan forgiveness program for the federal government. So your loans, if you're pursuing PSLF, your loans should be held by Fed Loan Servicing to make sure that you are in a qualifying repayment plan and that everything is being monitored the way that it is supposed to be. So you're going to want to work with them. And again, they've got a lot of information on their website. Fed Loan Servicing does about this particular program. Studentaid.gov is also a really great resource if you've got questions about getting your loans transferred over there. And for those of you who are, maybe have had your loans elsewhere for a while, if you are looking at say 5 years where they haven't been in the right repayment plan or they haven't been the right type of loan, contact me. I'm going to have my contact information at the end here, and we can talk a little bit about some cost benefit analysis for, does it make sense for you to pursue public service loan forgiveness? Because again, if you haven't been in the right repayment plan with the right type of loans for that entire time, and you've been making payments on them and you've been, getting that balance worked down, doesn't make sense for you to start at zero to start working towards those 120 payments. If it's just that you haven't been in the right repayment plan, again, you can apply for that temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. But if it's that you don't have direct loans and you're looking to consolidate them and you've been paying them down for a while, that is very different. And that means that you're going to have to start from scratch to get to that 120 payment. So that is definitely a cost benefit analysis on the individual level, and I'd be happy to help with that.
So I think you just answered it, but the question came, doesn't consolidation reset the 10-year time?
Yes. Yeah. Again, because you need to have the right type of loans, you need to be in the right type of repayment plan, and you need to be working for the right type of employer. So it's a three-pronged approach, right? And again, temporary expanded will help with the repayment plan part of it. But if you haven't had direct loans, you haven't consolidated them, then that's not going to work for you.
And then two more questions. Are you going to talk about the tax implications of what is forgiven?
Well, yeah, I can. So for public service loan forgiveness, and actually for any kind of loan forgiveness for the next several years, there are no tax implications. So for public service loan forgiveness, you're not paying taxes on the amount that is ultimately forgiven. That was always part of this particular program, or at least for the last 5 years, it was part of this program. And then we do have, with some of the emergency relief measures, they did put into place that student loan discharges are tax-free through, I believe, 2026. So if you are looking at getting something forgiven through a different way outside of public service loan forgiveness, you're not going to be taxed on the amount that is discharged. So they did put that into place. The government, if you've been following the news, they have discharged certain types of student loans that were held by the Department of Education, whether they were with one of the other service providers or whether they were with Fed Loan Servicing or whoever. They have discharged some of those, and they made sure to put in place before they started doing that those discharges would be tax-free, so that individuals who, say, had $50,000 in student loans discharged because they were defrauded by their educational institution, that they weren't paying taxes on that $50,000 that was being discharged, because that would really hurt come tax time. So good question.
So back to the last question, the follow-up was, what if you were in all three requirements, but just not with Fed loan?
So you don't have to be with Fed Loan Servicing to be pursuing the public service loan forgiveness program. That's who administers it. So most likely, if you're meeting all three prongs, you are with Fed Loan Servicing. That is who administers the public service loan forgiveness program. So again, if that's your unique situation where you're not with Fed Loan Servicing, but you've been doing everything else and you've been submitting your employment certifications and you've been getting all of that back, follow up with me after today's conversation, and I'd be happy to take a look at what you've been doing and make sure that you're on the right track. Virginia, the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, also has an advocate specifically for student loans and for public service loan forgiveness, and I can always get you in touch with him as well.
And that's the end of the questions for right now.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the emergency relief flexibilities that are in place that are impacting all federally held student loans at this point. And this is impacting public service loan forgiveness. But again, even if you're not pursuing it, if you have federally held student loans, these are the emergency relief flexibilities that are in place for you right now. So we are at a place where we are at $0 payments, and the loans are being charged 0% interest. And those null payments do still qualify for public service loan forgiveness as long as you are meeting the other requirements of the program. So for example, if you were working for VCU at the start of the pandemic, and you have been in a qualifying repayment plan prior to the pandemic, prior to March 13th shutdown, you can, all of those $0 payments count towards public service loan forgiveness. So this is particularly helpful for anybody who's pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Even if you aren't, it allows you to either take a break or try to pay those loans down a little bit faster. So those flexibilities do still count towards your public service loan forgiveness journey, as long as you are still working for a qualifying employer, you're working full-time, or whatever the employer decides to be determined is full-time, and you're in that qualifying repayment plan to start with. A little bit more on some things to know related to public service loan forgiveness and the COVID-19 pandemic and some of those emergency relief flexibilities. So if your hours were reduced during this pandemic, which for the most part wasn't the case with VCU, but if you have a spouse or partner who is also looking at pursuing public service loan forgiveness and was working outside of VCU, the limited work hours, reduced work hours can limit your eligibility. If you drop below full-time status, even if you were still working for a qualifying employer, those payments, those $0 payments wouldn't necessarily count towards public service loan forgiveness. If you have made a payment during the suspension period, which started March 13th of 2020 and is running through September 30th of 2021, if you made any payments, you can actually request to have those refunded to you. So a lot of people are on an auto bill pay for your federally held student loans. And so if an auto draft came out after March 13th, 2020, you can actually request to have that refunded back to you. So that happened with me. I had an auto draft, and it usually comes out on the 28th or something like that. And so it still came out, that March 28th payment still came out, and I reached out and asked to have it refunded back to me because I didn't want to make any payments that I didn't have to, because that $0 payment for March was still going to count towards my public service loan forgiveness as I pursue it. So that's, I think, an important thing to make sure that you're kind of following. And you can certify your employment or apply for forgiveness if you've made those 120 qualifying payments. You can do that during the suspension period. So if you're just getting started and you want to make sure that your employer certification goes through, you can go ahead and do that now. They are taking a little bit more time to do all of that. They're doing some extra review processes, and they're just behind on paperwork right now, just because of so many things that are happening related to these emergency reliefs and related to people trying to get on track with their student loans. But you can apply for that final discharge, or you can submit your employment certification during the suspension period. So the PSLF help tool has all the forms that you need. And again, those e-signatures are not accepted. It has to be something that is actually drawn or written and scanned. You can't do the DocuSign, for example. That's not going to work for them. Couple other things that I wanted to talk about when we're thinking about our loans and these emergency relief measures that are in place. I'm actually going to go back a slide just to make sure we're all on the same page here. These relief flexibilities go through September 30th. There's a lot of news, there's a lot of speculation about other things that might come down the pipeline before September 30th related to federally held student loans. However, no hard decisions have been made yet. So everybody who is on this call who has federally held student loans that are currently in that $0 payment and accruing 0% interest need to be prepared that their payments are going to resume in October of 2021. You will be getting notifications through Studentaid or through Fedland Servicing, and I believe they have to send those notifications 30 days prior to your first bill being due when those payments resume. So you do need to take a look at that September 1st, really, to make sure that you are aware that your payments are going to resume. And if you need, at this point, because it hasn't been extended any further, if you need some additional time or you need additional deferment or whatever it is, that you are applying for that ahead of time, ahead of that September 30th cutoff date. Because I don't want you to get into a place where your payments resume and you're not ready to start resuming making your payments. So just make sure that you are keeping track of what that looks like as we get closer to that September 30th end date for these flexibilities. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. That's really the information that I had for all of you today. We covered a lot, and I know this is a big program. It's a convoluted program, so I'm happy to answer additional questions while we still have some time on our webinar today. But if there's any questions about the relief flexibilities, let's take those first, and then we can go back to some general questions just about PSLF.
So Carolyn, there's only two more questions. The first one was, well, it's not a question. Someone asked if you could share the advocate's information with us.
Yes, we can include that when we send out the recording because I do not remember his email address off the top of my head, but we can absolutely share that. And he works with Chev specifically around advocating for government employees and those who are pursuing public service loan forgiveness to make sure that they are meeting program requirements, or if you've been declined, your final forgiveness application has been declined, he can help you to try to figure out why that might be. And if it was a mistake on the part of the servicers, then he can help you to kind of navigate those waters as well.
Okay, and then the other question is, sorry, I know you mentioned, but could you re-clarify, taxes on forgiven PSLF loans don't apply. You mentioned something about the year 2026.
Yes, so for public service loan forgiveness discharges, they are not taxed. So whatever your loan balance is, when you apply for forgiveness through public service loan forgiveness and you get an amount discharged, that will not be taxed. And that has never been taxed. The 2026 date is for other types of discharges. And I say that because there is still speculation about some type of universal forgiveness, or we've seen in the past couple of months where borrowers who were permanently and totally disabled, their loans were discharged. They're not paying taxes on that discharge. So if there's some kind of universal discharge that happens, which caveat is very, very unlikely to happen. So I say this, and of course the Department of Education is going to come out tomorrow and say we're forgiving $10,000 per borrower for federally held student loans. That's not going to happen. But if it does, they have put that in place so that those types of measures, you don't end up getting taxed on any kind of universal discharge. But for public service loan forgiveness, if you're applying for that final forgiveness, that final discharge, that is not taxed. That's never been taxed.
Okay, we have another question. I have a student loan from another provider. Would you happen to have the information if I wanted to consolidate this loan into my federal loan?
Yeah, so if you have got, they have to be federally held student loans. If you're going to consolidate, if they were a private loan, you can't consolidate them into a direct loan and have it qualify for PSLF. But if it was a federally held loan and you want to have that move over into a direct loan, you can absolutely do that. Again, work with studentaid.gov or Fedland Servicing to have that happen. Another thing with consolidation is if you have consolidated your loans into a direct consolidated loan and they include one of the Parent Plus loans, those are not going to, if it's a consolidated loan that has any part of it has got the Parent Plus loan included in it, it is not going to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So you want to make sure that you always keep that one separate.
So it looks like she said that the loan is with Navient, N-A-V-I-E-N-T, and then somebody else said that her understanding is Navient is a federal loan provider.
Yeah, so the way that federal loans work is the Department of Education doesn't really manage most of them themselves. They contract those out. So Fed Loan Servicing does everything for public service loan forgiveness. Navient is a huge provider of federally held student loans. So basically the Department of Education issues it, and then Navient is the one who is the servicer, right? They end up ultimately holding the loan. But yes, that is still considered a federal loan. So if it was a direct loan and is now held by Navient, and you would like it to be held by Fed Loan Servicing, so you can go for public service loan forgiveness, you can absolutely do that. Again, it's kind of a question of how far are you into the repayment process? Because if you're going to move it into that PSLF and it hasn't been in the right repayment plan, or it wasn't the right type of loan, you're going to be starting at zero. Right. So if you've made a dent in your loans, that might not be the right trajectory for you.
And Carolyn, will you share your email address? So if people have additional questions, somebody just said, if it's with Navient, do you have to move it?
Yeah, so the way that it works is if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, you're doing that income-driven repayment plan, usually, and I say usually because for every individual, it can be a little bit different, but usually they will move it from whatever loan servicer you currently have into Fed Loan Servicing.
So Carolyn, the type, of course, you know, my eyes are not great. Is your email finsuccess@vcu.edu?
That is it. It's the short version of financial success.
Okay, I just put it in the chat also.
Great, thank you. And that's the same for our website as well. Basically, financial success was just too long to have, so we had to shorten it. So yes, it is finsuccess.vcu.edu, or you can visit our website, finsuccess.vcu.edu, and I'd be happy to follow up if you've got more specific questions about your unique situation and what you need to do to move forward for public service loan forgiveness. Again, you know, your best bet for starting out with this, if you are just starting out with this, is to go ahead and make sure that you've got your income-driven form submitted and that you are doing your employer certification. That's a great first step. And if you've already done those things and you're just wanting to make sure that you're on the right track, I'm happy to sit down with you and take a look at what you've got going on and make sure that you're all set to continue pursuing that forgiveness option.
So it looks like there are no more questions. Carolyn, you always do such a fabulous job with this talk. You provide so much information, and people are saying they appreciate all the information. And so I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is, like I said, we've kind of done this a few times, and I feel like we need to do this pretty much every spring and fall, and maybe summer. Summer is good because people have a little breathing room. So thank you again for doing this, and I will be happy to share this with people once I get it back from Carolyn. And that looks like the end of the question. So thank you again.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining me this morning. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. I hope I've answered more questions for you than I have caused questions to pop up in your brain. But again, if you have any additional questions or need some additional support regarding public service loan forgiveness or your financial wellness journey in general, you can always reach out to my office. We are here to help you make sure that you're on track towards financial success. That's our job. It's what we love to do. And I just appreciate all of you taking the time. And Cindy, thanks again to you and to VCU Human Resources for hosting this programming and having me join today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.